All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Featured Reads interview, Abiding by the 5 Universal Laws of Success. All right. My name is Diana Bronchuk. I am the Program Assistant for the Office of Alumni Relations Educational Initiatives team, and I'm really excited to be hosting our live event for the Featured Reads program. The Featured Reads program is where we engage in online discussions about professional development and notable works written by Northeastern alumni and faculty. The past 2 months, we've been answering weekly questions about the formula, the universal laws of success, written by Professor Albert-László Barabási. An international bestseller published in November of last year, the formula unveils groundbreaking discoveries from decades of academic research that not only highlights the scientific and mathematic principles that underpin success, but also revolutionizes our understanding of it. I'm so excited to be interviewing the author of the formula, Professor Albert-László Barabási. Barabási is the Robert Gray Dodge Professor of Network Science and a Distinguished University Professor at Northeastern University in the College of Science. He directs the Center for Complex Network Research at Northeastern and holds appointments in the Department of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and the Central European University in Budapest. He's the author and editor of many books, including Burst, the hidden pattern behind everything we do, and Linked, the new science of networks. Barabási's work has led to breakthroughs like the discovery of scale-free networks, which makes him one of the most cited scientists today. But don't worry, folks, he's just like us because he loves Harry Potter and he's a huge Nora Jones fan. Right, Professor?
That's correct, yes. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. So, just to let you know, each week of the Featured Reads group, we've been posting discussions based on the different chapters and the laws coinciding them. I'd like to ask you a few of them, if that's all right with you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So during the interview, audience members are more than welcome to type their own questions in the chat box on the right-hand side in the sidebar. You just have to click on those purple arrows in the right-hand corner to open it up, and then click on the bubble box. All right. And then at the end of all of my questions, we'll take it away with audience Q&A. All right, Professor, are you ready to go?
Diane, I'm so ready.
All right. I mean, after your computer crashing today, I think you are more than prepared to tackle these questions. All right. Mm-hmm. So, like the case of Fountain, art galleries, prestigious schools, and other high-profile institutions keep standards high and will actively build their own competition to do so. In your opinion, do you find it ethical for these institutions to regulate and maintain their own standards?
Well, I mean, certainly we all have the right to kind of keep order in our own courtyard, right? But before we actually start thinking about, how to think about success and performance, let's also say, what does it mean to have success and what does it mean to performance in the case of an institution, in case of an individual, in case of a school, that's where we're talking from today, right? And I think it's a preamble, it's important for us to say, how do we scientifically distinguish these two subjects? And because when we go to school, whether that's an elementary school, university, you name it, there is a promise that you get performance and performance leads to success. What's the difference between them, right? And one of the things that we did in our research is to distinguish these two different things. And to think of performance as something that you do as an individual, how well you solve your homework, what kind of paintings you paint, what kind of theorems you prove, what kind of businesses you put together. And success is really about how does the community notice, perceive, and what you have done, and eventually how do they acknowledge it and reward you for that. So in other terms, your performance is about you and your success is about us. Mm-hmm. And that's an important issue in the context of what you're asking, right? Is to say, how do institutions, what's the role of the institutions in this story? What's the role of the schools and the universities? And one of the most surprising discovery, actually, that that kind of the community has made, the researchers have made, is to say, yes, we try to be in important institutions, but really these institutions add relatively little to what we bring on the table. And let me be much more specific, right, is that yes, institutional prestige does matter, but institutional prestige it's a signal of who goes there, what is the level of knowledge, and so on of the people, and it's really not the one that you are being offered, but you're bringing lots of things on the table. So your performance and the institutional prestige have to go hand in hand, and we can go deeper into that as you move along with the questions.
Okay, so one's performance could influence these regulations then, or these standards, or?
So performance is necessary, and one of the things I always want to warn people when they think about the formula is where the formula is really about how do you translate your performance into success, right? And this is not a book, or this is not a research to tell you how you take crappy performance and get a big success out of it, right? It's that will not succeed. You may get a momentary peak in success, but it will fade if you don't have the performance. The book is really about the fact that at any moment there are quite a number of people who are offering very high performance, but not all of them will actually be successful at what they do. So the question is, when you have people with indistinguishable performance, what are the mechanisms through which some of them will be selected for success and others will not? So when it comes to get into Northeastern, for example, you do need to have performance. Will not Northeastern actually take that performance and enhance it and allow you to be successful? That's the real question we need to ask in context of institutions.
Okay. All right then. So this kind of falls into the next question. When discussing your research with the Boston public school system, you stated high achievers continue to excel no matter what education a school offers.
Mm-hmm.
So tying back in, should rankings and/or ratings matter when we're applying ourselves to new institutions?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I'm glad you asked that, because it really kind of brings back a much deeper question. Is it really the school who makes you, or is it you who make the school?
Ooh.
And the data actually is indicating the second option, and very strongly so. And that kind of back to your original question, what does the Boston School research show? It was a fabulous study which looked actually at what happens to the students who apply to the top tier school, high schools in Boston, which is the Boston Latin, the Boston Academy, and I don't remember the third one. And they all admitted through a competition and then effectively ranked based on the grades, and the top percentage gets into the Boston Latin, those who don't make it into the Boston Academy, and then those who don't make it to the third tier school. And these all three are excellent schools, but obviously there's a pecking order. Now you would expect that making it into the Boston Latin is really the goal, because if you go there, because it's a better school, you will have better peers, and you will have better professors, better resources, and therefore you're much more likely to succeed in life, right? And yet the data indicates otherwise. And because this particular exam system sets up a control study, what researchers did is that they looked at the student who just barely, the last one to be admitted in Boston Latin, and the first one to be admitted in the Boston Academy. That is, those who are virtually indistinguishable in terms of their entry performance. But one of them got to go to a better school, and the other one to a slightly less good school. And again, you can ask at the end of the Boston, at the end of the second school as well, what happened. And the question you ask, 4 or 6 years forward at graduation, will the student who had the opportunity to go to Boston Latin have done better than the one who didn't? And the answer is, it didn't. That is, the student who went to Boston Latin had an indistinguishable exit performance, like SAT grades and admission to college, than the one who didn't make it into the Boston Latin. And that experiment has been repeated in New York and in multiple countries, including in my home country, Hungary and Romania, and the results were always the same. That is that the one who didn't make it had exactly the indistinguishable performance than who did. So what does this mean? It means really that Boston Latin and the higher tier schools have added very little to the performance of the individuals. They are superb school, but they're superb school because they allowed the best to study there. And it is really the quality of the people who are admitted and who go there make them so superb. And it's not really as much the quality of the teaching and the value added in that respect. And the same is true actually for universities. A beautiful study looking at Ivy Leagues showed that really there is very little that Harvard adds over Northeastern to you, given controlling for your entry-level abilities, your SAT score, socioeconomic background. And the only students who really benefit from a Harvard education versus a non-Ivy one are the minority students. And the interpretation for that is that for the minority students, the Harvard and the Ivy League environment gives them access to the network they would not have given their background. The non-minority students who come from affluent, well-to-do neighborhood, intellectual homes and things like that, just Harvard is just reflecting their ability. And they would do fine even if they don't go to Harvard. And actually the beauty of the story is this. The question is, what determines your long-term success in terms of how much money you earn 10 years after graduation? Is it the school that you graduated from? Is it the school that you applied for and you were admitted but you didn't go to? Or is it the school that you applied to and you were never admitted to? And it's hard to believe, but your long-term success, controlling for socioeconomic background and your SAT scores to begin with, is determined by what was the highest level school that you applied for, whether you were admitted or not, and whether you applied or whether you went there or not. Let me break it down. If you went to University of Michigan, but you applied to Harvard, and Harvard did not accept you, 10 years later, your income level will be comparable to the Harvard graduate who had the same SAT score as you did. So down the line, actually, what this tells us is that what is the highest level school you apply to? It shows your ambition level. And given your entry scores and your preparation, and together with ambition, they together determine your long-term success, not the school from which you graduate.
Oh, really? Okay. Thank you for breaking that down some more for us then. So, kind of a selfish question then here. Should we view the rankings of our schools as a reflection of our own accomplishments then?
It is. It is, because schools try to hire actually the best students they can. So at the end, you know, if you are admitted to Northeastern, it means that you are a superb student to begin with, and we think that you will succeed. Right. And what you should not expect necessarily is that going, you know, like rejecting Harvard and coming to Northeastern will actually hurt your career. No, most likely you will have the same kind of income level and success later in life, 10 years later, as if you would have chosen, let's say, the Harvard offer.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So you hear that, alumni? We're just as good as Harvard graduates. All right. So tying into the third law, oh, excuse me, I just skipped a question. So the second law contradicts the idea that practice makes perfect, since performance can only take you so far. Should we build different skills to have multiple performances in different industries? Or should we really just focus on one to build preferential attachment?
I see. Well, it's a very good question. First of all, we already built skills that are appropriate for multiple as well as specific industries, right? Because in the moment you study to become a physicist or a marketing major and so on, you are committing yourself to maximize your performance in that particular area. And sometimes you even kind of select classes and do projects that are really setting you up to be in the entertainment industry versus in high tech or so on, right? So that's really given to us that we do that. Now the question is really, is that sufficient to have the performance? And that's really what the research showed, and what the formula I try to get across, is that having the performance is only the entry point of this conversation. And what you need to prepare for is that no matter how good you are at something, there will be several other individuals applying for the opportunity that you are going for who are indistinguishable from you. Not to say that they are better or worse than you, but what is really matters is that they are indistinguishable in terms of potential performance. Because unless you are a runner, where we do have a chronometer to measure your speed, in most areas, we do not have an accurate measure to say what is really your performance. And therefore, if you have gone through certain steps, got a degree in that area, worked at a reputable place, we think that we have it, but we really don't know that for sure. So what happens in these situations is that the recruiter, like even myself when I hire people for my lab, are faced with several individuals who all have the qualifications for the job. So at that moment, the choice is not based on performance, even though we claim it so. I claim that I think I'm hiring this person because I think he has the best performance, but in reality, I'm not able to objectively distinguish them. And it boils down to many, many secondary effects that have nothing to do with performance. So in the formula, I showed this dramatic study where they have looked at music competitions, top music competitions, the Queen Elizabeth, where 12 finalists are chosen actually to kind of compete for the final prize. It's a competition that has been going from 1937, the long history. And what happens for the last 12 finalists is that they compete 2 a day for 6 days. And oddly, since 1937, no one has ever won the competition in day 1. That is, those who randomly were chosen on play day 1, they never won. And only one has won in day 2, and most of the winners come in day 5. Now, if you randomly mix the players up, which they do in this competition, how comes that never ever anyone won at day 1, and then about 70% of the winners are coming from day 5? Well, that's because when a jury, even an expert jury, is confronted with 12 well-prepared individuals who are all very good at what they trade, they are unable to objectively make decisions based on performance. And unknown to them, they start making decisions based on other factors. One important factor is immediacy, which is the one they remember most because they were among the last. Their preparation to listen to, so they never choose the first one because they're still learning how the competition works. Only at the later competitors they're able to pay attention. And often this leads to discrimination, that women are typically ranked lower than men. And this immediacy is very important. If you actually want, my favorite story in that space is that when the formula was going on the market, a publisher, we interviewed 7 publishers who wanted to publish it. And I asked each of the editors, why would you like to have this book? And one of the editors said, because this book helped me understand a puzzle that I had now for almost a decade. He said, every spring, I interview several intern candidates for an internship in my publishing house. It's a major publishing house in New York. And oddly, I never understood why is that the best candidate always is the last one to come to interview. And of course, it's not that the best candidate is the last one to interview. It is that through the early candidates, the person learned what he or she needs for the job. And by the time the last interviewee comes along, it asks the right questions and hence gets the right answers. And all of them were just as prepared to take the job, right? And all would have done us just as well. But immediacy really affects our ability. So the bottom line, to kind of summarize this, when you're going to hit the job market, whether after graduation or any time in your life, you have to be prepared that because we are unable to objectively measure performance, there will be several individuals who will be just as qualified as you are for that job. And at that moment, the decision will not be based entirely on performance, but on many other factors. How do you make sure that you read the book, or that you read, that you pass that exam, and so on? And that's really what the formula is about. What are the effects and the mechanisms that play a role when people make decisions about hiring and promotion and other things when they are not able to objectively measure performance? And there are quite a number of clues that apply there, and as are discussed in the formula.
Right. So kind of a follow-up to that question, to try to make ourselves more indistinguishable while we're interviewing or while we're in competitions, we try to make ourselves appear different. I know in one of your chapters you had talked about when you were hiring a postdoc, you noticed that she had a tattoo of an equation, and that was clearly helped you remember this candidate and ultimately hire her amongst probably what, tens of other well done, well read candidates, right?
Correct. Yes, and that's indeed, this really deeply ties to what we just talked about. Is that that at that moment as well, I was faced with several candidates who were, everybody was actually prepared and willing and had the qualifications to take the job. And I was on, and at that moment, I'm kidding myself when I think that I'm objectively able to really assess their ability to perform in the lab. I can't. In some cases, there are some signs we say, okay, you're not a bit fit to our culture, the way we think about things, but we're still left with half of the candidates who would fit in very well. And the question is how you decide. And we might as well acknowledge that we don't have the ability to decide based on future performance, and it comes down to often random effects, like seeing something individuality in that person, that, for example, having a tattoo of an Ising model, which is a physics equation, and to me what it says, oh my goodness, she has the commitment to her trade to actually tattoo something in her hand. I want her in my lab. These are the type of people who want a lab, who are so committed to their trade that they're willing to display it in such a public way.
So relevant and distinguished traits, basically.
It is, that's right, because at the end, we are hired as individuals, not only as skills, right? And how you make your individuality to shine up without compromising your skill set. That's one of the big questions we need to ask always as we go for an interview.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you feel like if the people who were in the Queen Elizabeth competition that unfortunately played on the first day of judging, what do you think they should have done differently to just be remembered?
It's interesting. So in that case, I would say it's not them. It's the competition has to think very hard about what they're doing wrong and how they're really may not be selecting the best competitor for the job and for the winner. And sometimes they should have a mechanism to simply admit we can't decide. And these people all deserve the gold prize, right? And I can tell you, and you know, a beautiful example of that, of how limited we are in measure performance, comes from swimming. So, you know, sports is one of the places that I always quote as being an area where we have an accurate measure of performance because we know how fast you swim, how fast you run. Yet, at the last Rio Olympics, Michael Phelps had to share the silver with the bronze with the Hungarian competition, Laszlo Cseh, as well as a third person. And the question is, why did they all have to share equally the bronze and none of them got the gold? And the reason wasn't because it wasn't clear who arrived first, because there are video recordings of who touches the ring first. But they could not decide who swam faster, because the swimming pool had an accuracy of about 1 inch. And the time difference in the arrival between these individuals was less than what it takes to swim 1 inch. So they could not objectively decide who swam faster, even though they knew who arrived first. Now, if not even in sports, where we have chronometers and video recordings are able to distinguish our best, how do we do in marketing? How do we do in business? How do we do in mathematics? Areas where we don't have a chronometer and we don't have video recording of your performance. And we can't. And when we cannot, we're not willing to admit it. And when we're not willing to admit it, then we start using other cues. And I think as a candidate, you have to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, next question. And audience members, if you have questions at any point in time, please chat them in the chat box on the right-hand sidebar. We'll get to them during the audience Q&A. So, tying into the third law, industries and institutions measure success differently. For instance, Professor Weinberg had a comparatively low salary to his university's football coach, yet is cited in over 14,000 scholarly documents. How can one use their previous success in a different sector to build new success in another?
That's a good question, but let's also talk about the fact that there is not a single success measure that works for everyone. And there are multiple dimensions of success. And one has to, so for example, if you are, if you are a scientist like Professor Weinberg, then a measure of success is really the scientific impact, and which is measured typically of how many citations his work gets, how many accolades and other things, right? But if you're a businessman, rightly so, sometimes your measure of success is the money you make, the sales you do, how well your company does. If you are a singer, one measure of success is how many people like your music, how many people download your music, how many people are willing to pay to come to your concert, right? And so on. And so each area has its own measure of success, and one is not better to the other one. One has to kind of think what is relevant in that case. But there's also another thing that we need to distinguish here, what we do and what we often talk about success. Success, a measure of success is that today I was able to arrive here at the interview in time and I wasn't late. That could be a measure of success for me. A measure of success could be watching my children grow and do well in school and so on. And these are very important dimensions of success, but they're really about satisfaction and happiness and personal success. And in our language, those are part of the performance. You need to be happy, you need to be satisfied in order to bring performance at work or whatever you do, right? But for us, these are not measurable success measures, even though they are very, very valid for the individual. So therefore, we define success as the collective measure. And in that case, scientific success is a collective measure because I write the research papers, but the community cites it, right? And that's a measure of success. In the business, money is a success measure because I put the market out or the product out, I form the company, but you come to as a consumer and you pay for my product, right? And the same for the singer, it's you who decide whether you're going to like my music or not and are willing to pay $1 to download it or not. So in that respect, I think it's very, very important for us to think about that success, the way we measure, is a collective success. Now, is this transferable into other areas? Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not, right? In a way that often there's a strong correlation, say, between scientific success and income, but there are certain areas where let's say in science, the scientific success is such a strong driving force that we scientists don't honestly care about income, right? As long as I have enough to be able to do what I'm really passionate about, it's not the money that makes a difference of what I do, but it is rather the intellectual challenges. So it's wrong to measure a scientist kind of measure of success by how much money he or she makes. It is really by the scientific impacts he or she makes, right? But there are certain areas where impact and, let's say, different measures of impact correlate, like music, right? If lots of people download your music, you're also going to be rich at the same time, right? So sometimes they correlate and they transfer, and sometimes they don't. So sometimes kind of building up expertise in one area and success in one area gives you a platform to move to the other one. Like if you're a successful singer, you may actually get the chance to star in a movie, and you may actually do well, and you may continue a career as a movie actor or actress, right? And there are examples like that. And there are other cases which it doesn't transfer. There aren't too many scientists with a very high scientific impact who actually have done very well in Hollywood.
Right. Kind of goes into fitness, your definition of fitness as well, and superstars too.
Yes, indeed, because that's really kind of the measure of success. The concept of fitness is very important in this case, which is really, fitness really tells you that, of course, networks matter, and what we call preferential attachment matters because it means that success breeds success. And I talk a lot about in the formula that this is really one of the fundamental laws of success. Success breeds success. The more citations you have, you will get proportionally more in the future. The more fans you have, your fan base will grow proportionally to that. So that's a very well established law of success. Then if only success breeds success, then those of us who have no success, we will never have one, right?
Right.
Well, that's where fitness comes in, because fitness really tells you how well the community actually views you compared to the other ones. And we discovered that many, many years ago, almost 20 years ago, in the case context of the World Wide Web, where we ask, why are certain web pages growing much faster than the other ones? And we realized, well, each website has something to offer. And those things, what they offer, are more useful for many people than others. And that's the concept of fitness. Fitness tells you, if I encounter you, do I want your phone number? If I go to your web page, do I want to save that link and come back again to that? And that's a distinguishing factor, that given the same number of links or same number of visibility, which one will have more traction? And what we learned really is that one of the fundamental laws of success is not simply success drives success, but previous success times fitness is the one that determines your future success. And that formula describes very, very different scenarios, from book publishing to music to scientific success. You have to bring something on the table. That's your fitness. And the community has to appreciate, and your previous success is just a vehicle to deliver that fitness to a large number of people.
It's kind of like there's no real thing as an overnight sensation.
Well, the 15 minutes of fame are very important, but only 15 minutes, right? And the question is how you make it lasting.
Okay, gotcha. A little personal anecdote. My mother always told me my greatest wish for my daughters is that they become successful in whatever way they choose. So now I can actually tell her, wow, Mom, that was actually a very good scientific discovery here. You should get that published.
Follow her advice.
I try, I do. She's great. Alrighty, so going into another question. When you introduced the fourth law in the book, you acknowledged that there were some social injustices tied to them, like racial and gender pay gaps. What advice do you have to work past these injustices to succeed?
Good question, and that's a very important one. And let's just kind of remind the reader that the fourth law is really about teamwork, right? and how really a team becomes successful. What kind of team characteristics lead to team success? And probably even more important, once you're part of a team, when and how do you get it for the team's work, if ever? And in a way, you know, these are very important questions, because we are living in an era where almost nothing can be done alone, but rather most of the work we do has to be with the help of others, and we need to be part of actually teams to achieve that. So now the question you are asking really about injustice and so on comes to the second part of that question, which is really, let's assume that I am part of a team, and let's assume that the team succeeded. Will I get the credit for the team's work? And the reason why this is an important one is because we assume that if our teams succeed, then we have also succeeded. And that's certainly the case if you join that team, not because you wanted credit for the work, but you just wanted the team to succeed. And I participate in many teams where I do not want actually any credit for the team's work, but I just want to help them succeed. However, there are cases where the success of the team is essential for your professional success. And that's often, for example, in science, right? We write many papers in collaboratively. And then the question is, if 10 of us write a paper and that paper has a major discovery reported in it, which of us will get the Nobel Prize? Is it the person who actually came up with the idea? Is the one who came up with the solution? Is the person who actually put together the team? Is it the one who had the eureka moment? Or is it simply the person who made sure that the coffee is always warm on the table when we were working? Very important. And the problem is that we know who was responsible for the breakthrough within the team, but no one outside is aware of that. And yet the outside world has to decide that one of us will actually get that accolade for the teamwork. One of us or two of us will get actually promoted or get a major prize. And how is that decision made? And this comes back to the fact that success is not about what you do, but what people perceive that you do. And the team's credit attribution is really not about what you did within the team, but what the community perceives that your role was in the team. And we took this idea as far as that we were able to write an algorithm that could predict with high accuracy who in the paper will actually walk away for the credit for that paper. And this algorithm worked without reading the paper and just simply looking at the authors and what the authors have done outside of that discovery. And how does it work? So you are in the alumni relationship, I'm in network science. If we do a great alumni event with my participation that is perceived as success, it's your success. Because you brought me in, you organized the event, and you made it a success, and I was just a conduit, somebody who helped that event to be successful, like this particular one. I'm sure it's going to be a great success, and it's going to be yours. However, if you and I write a research paper together on network science, and you may provide the idea, and you may do all the work, I hate to say it's going to be my success.
Right.
And the reason for that is because you have no track record as of now in network science. So when people will look at the Diane Laszlo paper, it will perceive that this is Laszlo because they know me in that community and they don't know you. So,
Right.
so the credit is assigned at the outset by the community's perception of whose intellectual journey is that particular part of work is part of. Now, you can change that. And that's why I, for example, tell every student of mine when we write a great paper, say Nature or Science, which are the top journals, or even in a not so high profile journal, I tell them, okay, now we have published a paper, but you have to acknowledge that, you have to realize that this is my paper. How are you going to make it your paper? And the way you're going to make it your paper is that you're going to convince your community, the community, that you exist and it's your work. And you do that by going out and showing your face to the community, giving talks about this, and letting them understand your role in the project, number one. And number two, going out and publishing more great work in the same area that is independent of me, but they will make an impact so that slowly the credit will shift from me to you. And I have students who have done that fabulously, and I have students who have not done so well. So for example, one of my great students, Marta Gonzalez, she and I have started working when she was a postdoc actually in my lab on human mobility. And we ended up publishing several high-profile papers on which my previous book, Birth, was based on how people move around and what are the fundamental laws that govern our daily patterns. But what Marta has done is that she continued working in that area, and she published multiple papers without me. And now, if anybody thinks about human mobility, they don't think about me. They think of Marta as being the expert in that area. So credit can shift, but you have to work hard to kind of manage the community's expectation of the credit to really achieve the credit. One shot will not do it.
Gotcha. Okay. Excuse me, my mouth got a little dry there. Okay, then. So going back to social injustices and the fourth law being about teamwork, do team leaders kind of have a responsibility to minimize injustices or to try to help push success amongst their members?
They do, in the same way as I have responsibility of telling my students and postdocs that they need to go out and convince the community of their role in the project. I think that's the role of each team leader. The team leader's role, of course, is to make sure that the team is functional, right? And the team leaders particularly play an important role when the team's role is creative and not performance-based. And this is what I'm actually talking about in the formula, is that you put a very different team together when you are aim to achieve success in the terms of something that scales as success because you're discovering something new, you're putting a new product out that didn't exist, versus the team's role is solve a problem that is difficult but is solvable and just needs lots of work to solve that. And in the case of a performance-based team where there's a well-defined task and has to be done, actually horizontal teams work better, where there's no major leadership, but everybody chips in almost equal manner. And what the research shows in that case is that it's not the individual IQ of the team members matters, nor actually their individual level of ambition, but rather their ability to pay attention to each other, their empathy of willingness to kind of working with others, and third is the fraction of the woman in the team. So it's all about communication and being able to work together. However, you're putting together a team that is aiming for creating something that it didn't exist before. that the community will recognize as such, like building a new software that never existed before. Then the research of James Backgrove, my former postdoc, who's now a faculty in Vermont, shows that this pattern doesn't apply, but their leadership really matters. And the more the leader does in the job, the more successful the team is. So if you want a success-oriented team, get a strong leader and have the team help them. If you want a performance-oriented team, get a horizontal team and have them self-organize to achieve the task.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great to hear. All right, everybody, I'm going to ask the last question that I have, but audience members, I do encourage you to please type in your own questions in the chat box on the right-hand side. So, all right, so Professor Barabási, you bring a lot of personal touches and reflections into the book, from your first physics quiz in high school to your son's college decision. Can you say that you abided by the universal laws of success?
I did, sometimes unconsciously before we actually formalized them, and now much more consciously, right? And not only that I abided that, but I use that on a daily basis as I advise my students in their career, and I invoke them actually from that perspective, because I really think that, first of all, these are universal laws, meaning that they apply to most individuals, but you need to learn how to take advantage of them and how they will actually apply to you, depending on the stage of your career where you are. And I must say that actually even writing the book has fundamentally changed the way I advise my students and postdocs. So I'm at the stage of my career that what I do is not as much about personal success, but it's equally important for me is the success of my team, my students, my postdocs, and people who work with me, and their future success. So I think these days, on a daily basis, I invoke them much more to help them than to help myself.
Well, that's very noble and humble of you. So, all right, so we have a question from the audience. As a minority, what strategy do you recommend me while interviewing for a job?
That's a very good question. So first of all, let's get the bad news out, is that there's lots of data to indicate, right? And this is, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you anything surprising, that minorities have the lower hand when it comes to these processes, right? And that we as interviewers are unconsciously biased towards people like us, right? And as much as we try to fight that, this type of biases continue creeping in. So then the question is that if you think that you have the performance, how do you actually succeed? And the advice I give, actually, whether you are a minority or not, I don't think there's a particular minority path to success. I think there is a path to success by understanding what's the role of the performance and what's the role of the selection process. And the way I think about it is that if you were invited for an interview, it indicates that you have the performance to get that job. And the fact that you didn't get it, it's not a vote on your ability to hold that job. It's a little bit random, or very, very random outcome that may depend on the way you interviewed, the way you felt, the way the rapport you had with the person you interviewed, as well as what kind of day they had, and whom they did so before and whom they did so after you, and were you the last or the first to interview. But having the very fact that you were interviewed to begin with is an indication that you have performance. So that is, you have the Q factor, as I talk in the book, for success. So how you bring the success out from it? By trying it again and again and again. Because really, once you have the performance, then it's really a random process whether you are able to cash that performance into the success, whether that's getting a job or writing a fabulous paper or getting into a gallery, whatever your measure of success is. And so in that respect, that's a vote of confidence. You have it whether you are a minority or not, and you need to try over and over and not to get discouraged. And really, that's the fifth law in the book about this, right? What the fifth law is about, dispensing that myth that only young or only certain individuals can be successful. What we find is that success can come at any stage of the career, And really, the main reason what people seem to actually slow down in their path of success later in their career is because they are not trying any longer. They stop working, doing research, they stop printing papers, they stop writing songs and so on, and therefore, it looks like they're not successful. In reality, they are not productive. So as long as you keep your productivity up, that you keep trying over and over, it will come, and it's very random when that moment will come.
Gotcha. And kind of like what you said a little bit earlier when it comes to your advice to postdocs and the young researchers that work for you is to go out and do it on your own, work and network and promote your own findings and tell everybody what you did on the project. So it's a lot of personal branding too. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And and here you mentioned the word networking, and actually I'm a network scientist, and one chapter is totally devoted to networks.
Right.
And what I show there is that when only performance drives success, like case of sports, then networking is totally irrelevant. You just have to run fast, right? But when performance is not measurable, then really success is determined by networks. And I give the example of art, where we show that by mapping out the influence network in art, we are able to predict with exceptional accuracy the future career of an artist. So if you have a favorite artist, tell me the last 10 exhibitions they had. I'll place it on our map, and I'll tell you how would his or her career evolve in the coming 10 years. And sometimes I'll tell you bad news. I will say it's tanked. Or I would say it's going to stay where it is, it's not going to get further. Or I may say in the next 10 years it's going to reach in the top 5% of the art world. And the reason why we can do that is that when performance is not measurable, then it's the networks that really matter. But not any type of network. It's really, the question is, in each area there is a different type of network matters. So the recommendation of a network scientist is not mindless networking. Not just to know many people, but to really think down and sit down and think very deeply in your area that you really care about. What are the networks that really determine your personal success? And then focus on those rather than simply knowing as many people as possible.
Great advice there. All right, we have one question, and we probably have enough time for one more. So if anybody has one last dying question, please type it in the chat box. But how do you define high performance?
Well, that's a fabulous question, and there is not a single answer to that. So how do we measure performance, right? I mean, obviously in sports it's obvious how fast you run, are you winning or losing your games, and so on. And when you rank people based on performance, what we are finding is that no matter what area we look at, if performance is objectively measurable, it follows what we call a bounded distribution. And to understand that, let's think about running, right? Usain Bolt is the fastest runner on earth, fastest man on earth, as I often say. And indeed, he is so because he wins most of the running competitions. But when he does, he is really winning with at most 1% of speed difference compared to the loser of the game, the number 2, right? And when we look at his speed, it turns out that he's not running 100 times faster than I do, maybe twice as fast, and I'm not a good runner at all, right? So and what we see in case of Usain Bolt is characteristic of most areas. Human performance is inherently bounded. There are no major differences in performance between the individuals. This is not to say that there are no experts and no novices, but nevertheless, the difference between them is not huge, not orders of magnitude, but maybe a factor of 2 at most. And mathematically, this means that the distribution of performance typically follows a Gaussian distribution, saying most of them are comparable to each other, and very few are better than the average. So that boundedness is really kind of determines how you measure high performance. High performance is only meaningful relative to the others, right? Relative to how others within the same performance are running. So if you are a runner, how fast you are running compared to your peer group. If you are a businessman, how good opportunities you create compared to your peer group. But in many areas like business, we don't have a chronometer, we don't have a video recording, so it becomes very difficult to measure performance. This is not to say that we cannot distinguish a good businessman from a weak one. a good pattern from a weak one. But we're unable to distinguish the top ones. And that is inherent in our ability to measure performance. And I think the best way for an individual is beyond a certain point. The advantage is not coming from enhancing performance, but it's coming from presenting performance to the community and making the community understand that he or she has that performance. And I think that's where I would spend. Now, that is that we say, you know, you should spend your 10,000 hours to learn how to actually play music, run fast, solve a theorem, or prove a theorem, or whatever you do. But once you reach to that point that you're really good at what you do, I think you're better off spending your time of how you communicate that one to your community and how you maintain that performance. When psychologists measure performance, it shows that when you start learning a certain skill, whether it's language, whether it's ability to play music, no matter what is this, there's a rapid growth, and then you max out. And then you stay roughly with that performance for many years to come, with a very little decrease of that performance in time, but there's no more growth. So once you reach that peak that you're really good at something, where you have your personal best, the next way, the best time spent is not to kind of increase that with 0.5% or 1% that we are unable to see anyway, but rather to go and test run that and use it and communicate that one to the community that you have that performance.
All right, and so the last question is, how do you tie your idea of success with Taleb's idea of anti-fragility?
That's a very good question, and it's that is really about a very interesting and different thing that we do study in the lab. One of the, we are network scientists, and when we look at the fragility of networks, we look at the fragility of systems, we look at resilience, right, and the ability for people to break out. So I think it's really much more connected to that particular part of the story, is to kind of think about how, what are the different characteristics and systemic characteristics that allow certain events to suddenly emerge. So I think for success is one thing that you have to perfect your performance, right, and to get as performance as possible within your domain. But the other one is to kind of have a systems thinking about the environment that you are embedded in. And that's where kind of Taleb's idea come in. He thinks very carefully about the systems and the opportunities that the system allows. And in a way, he talks lots about these unexpected events that fundamentally change the landscape and move you from the top to the bottom or from the bottom to the top. And I think, personally, I think that once you have the performance, you are prepared to kind of handle these events in the system. But you have to have a system network thinking to say, how do you not sink under those events, and how do you take advantage of those? And actually, Taleb's early work that made him really well known is the black swan events, which is really about how you take advantage of the opportunities provided by events that everybody considers to be very bad and very damaging. And how you prepare for that, and how these events are part of the normal operation of any complex system, and you have to be prepared at it. Because kind of stepping back to a little bit is, like, why does a network scientist sit in success to begin with? Well, because much of network science is really about the structure of the network, and then we realized about several years ago that it's interesting to think about how the system looks like and how the system evolves. But it's just as interesting to think about what happens with the node, with the individuals who's part of the network and the system, and how his or her position in the system, coupled with his or her performance, guarantees or impedes success. And really the formula in our work is about how the network, together with your performance, guarantees your success, and what are the patterns and the law that you can take advantage in your life to maximize your success, given the networks and the performance that are available to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Barabási. I really also want to say that the last law, with persistence, success can come at any time, just makes me incredibly hopeful, knowing that I do have a long career ahead of me, but also anybody reading the formula as well. So thank you so much for your time, Professor Barabási. And for those of you who have read the formula or reading the formula, please check out the Featured Reads group on NU Source, your Northeastern networking platform, to be engaged with all of our different discussion questions. All right. And again, thank you so much, Professor. This has been fun and so entertaining, as well as just amazing work to hear that we can all learn to abide by the laws of universal success.
Diane, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and everyone else who chimed in for being part of this. Bye-bye then.
Well, take care.